Why not making your website accessible can ruin your business. So, a lot of people, when they hear the word accessibility, they think about buildings and how many years ago the Americans with Disabilities Act required people to build buildings in a way that allowed those with disabilities, specifically people in wheelchairs or having mobility issues, able to enter buildings through the use of ramps. This is the most common way people understand accessibility. And they might think of how a building might be designed to have big doorways to accommodate, again, wheelchairs, or if they're navigating some sort of exhibition that you may want to put things at a certain height so that people who are in wheelchairs, again, can view those objects in the same way someone who is standing. So these are some of the things that people think about when they hear the word accessibility. But many people are really not aware that accessibility also applies to the internet. And when the internet was invented, we had to change that law. It had to be applied to the internet. And so that happened in 2010. So it's already been a decade, but people are still not really that aware of accessibility, web accessibility, and web accessibility laws. And the reality is that as a business owner, if you're not aware of these things, you can be caught unawares and you can be sued and fined over a website that you have that isn't actually navigable by those with disabilities using assistive technology. And unfortunately, an ADA lawsuit on the internet is just as expensive as an ADA lawsuit that applies to a building. So this means that you can have a lawsuit of many thousands of dollars. So they've done a study of the recent ADA lawsuits, and the average cost to an ADA lawsuit in the United States is $35,000 plus legal fees. And legal fees can be up to about $10,000. So this is $45,000 as a potential lawsuit to you if you are not compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act and have a website that's navigable by those with disabilities. And it's become an issue where there's been greater enforcement over the last couple of years. In the past, lawsuits have been maybe a few thousand every year. But in 2021, these lawsuits skyrocketed to 300,000, and it affected many, many more businesses. I became first aware of this issue because I work for a design agency that does a lot of museum work, and in a few years back, I believe it was like around 2020, there were a rash of lawsuits against New York galleries that had websites that weren't compliant. And what did that mean for these galleries? It meant that because their websites were image heavy, that means they had mostly pictures on them, and they did not provide alternative text on their pictures. So alternative text is if someone who is blind comes to your website, they obviously can't see the photo. So instead, you provide alternative text. Alternative text will describe that photo to that person who is blind so they can understand the importance and content of that photo. So these New York galleries were kind of easy pickings for a lawsuit because they were not providing alternative text. And because the law had been on the books for about a decade, they lost the lawsuit, and unfortunately, some of these galleries closed and their businesses went bankrupt because the expense of the lawsuit was too much for that business to bear. So you don't want to have a business that gets into this issue, and you want to start thinking about this now, that you should make sure your website is compliant. There are designers out there that are aware of how to do this, and so when you are hiring a designer, you should make sure they are a designer that is well versed in web accessibility and know how to make your website web accessible, and also are aware of the local laws in your area, because the laws do differ depending on what country you're in. And in the United States, the laws, there can be a lot of litigation involved in the United States, just the way our society is here. So make sure you're protected by hiring the right people that are aware of that have the right knowledge about web accessibility. Make sure what you build is accessible so that you're compliant with the law, but also do it for those with disabilities who basically cannot access your content at all. The studies have shown that almost 20% of the world's population are disabled. So that's 20% of customers that are totally unable to navigate your website. That's business lost to you. By not helping this community, you're also not helping your business. So do the right thing and think about web accessibility when building your website. Presented by Designers Learn Code.